everyone, welcome back to the Music Chat. We're here in the church just momentarily to introduce our special guest today for a discussion of the harvest hymn, harvest-themed hymn, Bringing in the Sheaves. It's the second in a series of Thanksgiving harvest-themed hymns that we're discussing on these 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. Pastor Jeff is with us. He is our editor that always makes our chats look and make more sense with corrections and pictures and dates and things like that. And Pastor, can you just give us a little hint? Why is it that you want us to do this hymn today?
Let's just say that I recently discovered that the hymn, Bringing in the Sheaves, has a surprising personal connection to Grace Lutheran Church. And so we'll be exploring that today.
Awesome. So we'll see you in a moment on the deck for the Music Chat.
Bringing in the Sheaves, again, we're talking about it as a hymn, and it is in various hymnals as you spoke. Some of us have sung it before, but mostly you probably knew it from Little House on the Prairie, or from, you even said it was in The Simpsons.
Simpsons, yes, an episode of The Simpsons.
So it's kind of an iconic hymn to use if we want the listener or the person watching the story to think of the frontier. Of the people that were moving out west in the 1800s, because it was kind of a wild place for a long time, and it is a very agrarian kind of a hymn, so it's used iconically that way. And so a little bit about Knowles Shaw. He was, we're talking about the early 1800s, and he died in like 1874 or something like that, or in there somewhere. So we're talking about him being in Indiana at this time. It was not even a state at this time when his parents took him there. So it was pretty wild, and he grew up in that kind of environment. It was early, he was at his father's deathbed, and that was his father got sick and he died, as many people did at that time. And his father gave him words about taking care of your mother and to meet God.
To get ready to meet your maker.
Meet your maker,
Yes.
right. So those words kind of stuck with him. But his father also gave him his violin, and so he started to play, and it turns out he was very musical. He sang really well. He played the fiddle great. So as he got a little bit older, he was people would come to visit, and he would play the fiddle, and he became really well known for being a really great fiddle player. And they invited him to dances, and so he would go, and there would always be a lot of people and a lot of drinking, because it seemed like, and I read in one place, that's just what you did back then.
Yeah, on the frontier.
When you gathered, when you went to a dance, everybody was drinking a lot of whiskey and so forth. So he did have a little bit of an early introduction to that, and it was a big part of his life. But one night he was playing his fiddle at this dance, and his father's words came to him, and he actually just stopped in his tracks. And in fact, someone that was talking to him said, "Are you okay?" And he, and he finally stepped down off the stage, and he made a decision at that point that he was going to change his life, and that he was going to preach the Word of God.
Let's focus on that.
Focus on that.
Get ready to meet your maker.
Meet your maker, right. And so eventually what happened with Shaw is that he became a very charismatic evangelical preacher. And he was very musical, so he'd have these gatherings and he would be preaching and then he'd break into song. So, he just became very well known as a singing evangelist.
Yeah, by age 26, he was starting to be known as the singing evangelist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And think about those times. There were other evangelists around at those times, which is part of your connection there. And getting a big tent together filled with people and going to hear the evangelist was a social thing as well.
Absolutely.
And there wasn't much that went on in those little towns, and so going to church or having the big tent things was a big deal. So eventually, Knowles Shaw wrote the words for bringing in the sheaves, and it was, I believe you said it was because someone died, right?
Yeah. Your guy.
Your guy died. So that is where we have this connection.
Well, there were other evangelists in the area, and one of them was a guy named A.D. Fillmore. Mm-hmm. And he also was a preacher and evangelized a little bit, and I believe I have that right. I mean, it seemed like everybody wrote hymns back then. Mm-hmm. And how
else were they going to get them? They don't go to the
that's
bookstore.
True. Yeah, and he had another relative, another Fillmore relative, who was also evangelizing and preaching and songwriting at the time, and they all sort of knew each other.
Yep.
And they admired each other. In this case, Knowles and A.D. Fillmore, they admired each other's work and their abilities. And so when A.D. died, a little bit after he passed away, Knowles wrote these words, and it was then in memory of A.D. Fillmore. Mm-hmm. And so, A.D., it turns out, you might recognize the name Fillmore. And, I know the Fillmore name from, I've taught band for years and was inspired by many of the marches of Henry Fillmore. And Henry Fillmore, that we know as the march writer, almost second only, he's almost as well known as Sousa, John Philip Sousa. I mean, it's a big name in American, music lore. And so it's the Henry Fillmore sort of descended from this A.D. Fillmore, these ancestors.
Yeah, A.D. Henry Fillmore is the grandson of A.D. Fillmore.
So now, why does that have anything to do with
about your
Pastor
connection.
Jeff?
Tell us about that lineage.
Well, I was reading this book I have on Henry Fillmore, and one of the early chapters talks about the life of his ancestors, and it starts off with his grandfather, A.D. Fillmore, which we've been talking about, and talked about how A.D. was his full name was Augustus Dameron Fillmore, but if I had a name of Augustus Dameron, I'd probably go by A.D. also.
Yeah, really.
But he was kind of like an itinerant preacher, but also music educator. He would go from town to town on the American frontier and have a program of teaching music to that town over the course of a week. So people would come to the classes, and they'd start off with the do-re-mis, and by the end of the week they were singing 4-part harmony in a concert. And then he would move on to the next town. So he lived that life, but and had a family, about, I think, 9 kids. But relatively early in his life, he passed away and left. His oldest son was only 21. And so that oldest son, James Henry Fillmore, then was responsible for providing for his AD's widow, and then the rest of the children, and some were quite young at that point. So James Henry did this by starting, in essence, a music company He had inherited his father's musical abilities, songwriting, hymn writing, and then they formed what's called the Fillmore Brothers Music Publishing House. And one of those brothers, one of the younger brothers, was a brother named Charles. And at this point, you'll see up on the screen a picture of the family, part of the Fillmore family. So James Henry is in it. Henry Fillmore, the bandmaster, is standing next to him. And you'll see a bunch of other people. Some are related to A.D. Fillmore's wife's family. But you'll see a little girl right in the middle, kind of peeking around the back of somebody else. Number 13, hopefully, don't worry about the number. I don't believe in that superstition. But her name was Georgia Fillmore. And that little girl is my great-grandmother. So it's my mom's mom's mom. And because my mom is a member of Grace Lutheran Church, and I'm a member of Grace Lutheran Church, and my son, Joseph, is a member of Grace Lutheran Church, and all three of us are musical. We have 3 generations of that Fillmore musical family in our congregation. But I did not know this connection to the hymn, Bringing in the Sheaves, until about 4 weeks ago when I was reading it in a book and discovered that indeed the hymn was dedicated to the memory of, I guess, would be my 3rd great-grandfather, A.D. Fillmore. So I said, hey, this sounds like fun. Let's check this hymn out. So,
Well, it is fun in a way. It was unexpected. You know, we're doing this Thanksgiving thing, and when you think Bringing in the Sheaves, and you can see sheaves, you see a field of gold when you
trust me, there's a picture of Sheaves up on the screen right now.
I'm sure there is. And I mean, it's a very much a harvest idea. It's a harvest song, and you know, so it does conjure up those images. And you know, I have kind of a silly story about it too. You know, I'm gonna make sure I send the link to this chat to my brother, who took piano lessons from a lady in town called Mrs. Moore.
Okay.
And Mrs. Moore here in Dunedin taught all the kids, you know, back in the 60s. And Eric, my brother, took lessons, and Mrs. Moore was a Baptist, and she had this green Baptist hymn book that I think Eric had to buy at some point. My parents had to buy a hymn book. And I remember Eric learning Bringing in the Sheaves right in this living room.
Oh, wow.
And I wonder if he remembers that, but I remember it. I remember her handwriting, you know, the date that he learned it being in that hymn book. And our whole family learned Bringing in the Sheaves.
From his piano lessons.
Yes, we did.
Before we leave Shaw,
Yeah.
let me just say, you know, the connection once again with Shaw is that they were evangelists at this time, and
Yes.
they knew each other. But Shaw, in his, there every kind of obituary for him. He was killed in a train wreck.
Yes.
And in every obituary, they talk about the fact that he was sitting next to a Methodist minister, and he was talking with him, and the train went off the tracks.
It's derailed, yeah.
It derailed, and the Methodist minister says he pushed him away from where he was so that he would not be harmed, and he unfortunately was the only one that did not survive that wreck. And the Methodist minister did have cuts and bruises and broken bones, but he, in every obituary, you will say that, you know, he did that. So I really do feel like he was a person with a deep desire to do good for people. And although the lyrics of the hymn I have a little problem with, but it certainly is. It is. I really feel like in his heart, he really carried the love of God and Jesus.
Well, we could talk about that a little bit, but so in looking at the hymn, and we always try to figure out, you know, what was the life of the hymn, where did it start, who wrote it. Many times we found that there's a different melody writer that has put a melody to the words. And this had a kind of a surprising life too, that people still aren't really 100% positive, but when you open up most hymn books that still you have Bringing in the Sheaves, it will say by Knowles Shaw, the text, but it also will credit a guy named George Minor with writing the melody to it, the tune. And that kind of was the accepted thought for, you know, I mean, we're talking about an era when, you know, publishing's in its infancy in a way, and especially here in America, and, you know, we have the Frontier. And,
Well, Frontier Publishing.
Yeah, exactly.
Very.
Yeah, I mean, we've had publishing for a long time, but, you know, you think of, you know, watching a Bonanza episode and what they had to deal with in terms of acquiring news and, you know, information. It wasn't like you could Google anything, certainly back then.
Well,
so,
and
yeah.
it seemed like that from what we've researched with these different composers, that hymn writers, that if there were several hymns that they had composed, they want to put them together and they just create their own.
Right.
That's right.
I mean, they just really.
Everybody published hymn songbooks.
Yeah, they did.
A.D. Fillmore had his own hymnal, couple of them. And then even the Fillmores, then they started publishing hymnals, was like their main way of supporting the
That's
family.
right.
So it was just like the thing to do.
And the thing is, Minor was one of those hymn writer publisher
He
people.
too. He lived in Richmond, Virginia, and had served in the Civil War. Had gone to the military academy in Richmond, and the Bringing in the Sheaves text was written in 1874, just towards the end of Shaw's life. He actually died in 78, and so it was 4 years before he died. But here we just finished the Civil War, more or less, and. You know, he had served in the war, but he was a musician too. Like it seemed like everybody playing music in the house was a big deal in this time period, because, like you said, there wasn't a lot more to do.
That's
People
the
had
only way you got it.
Pianos were in the home. People sang around the piano, and so a lot of families. It wasn't unusual to be sort of an amateur musician.
No, in fact, I think most every family had a musician of some sort, or a piano, because
a lot of people played violin, you
Uh-huh,
know, and played for
because-
dances like Knowles Shaw did. You know,
how else are you going to do it? You don't put on a recording.
Or more even simple instruments like recorders or things like that.
So anyway, long story short, George Minor's version is in most hymn books today, but it's different. We know now that from reading many articles that Knowles Shaw did have a tune that went with Bringing in the Sheaves, and it's awfully reminiscent of the tune that we know as Bringing in the Sheaves.
Until it isn't.
Well, it is very reminiscent, I think. So what we've concluded, and what others have concluded, is that George Minor basically took Shaw's tune and simplified it a bit and rearranged it, threw out a verse that had gotten in there, and actually we're not sure that the original Knowles Shaw version had at least 3 verses, maybe 4.
Right.
Some people say that the missing stanza came from another guy, a guy named Franklin Iwan, who I didn't even bother to look up. But he also was an arranger, and he had this stanza too in a songbook of his called Go and Tell. And it was a totally different tune. And I didn't really go there because I didn't want to know, you know, anymore. But it appears nowhere else. Nobody has seen this missing verse in any other source. And so, you know, it could have been Knowles Shaw, you know, and we don't really know, but that verse, you want to talk about it a little bit, Pastor, the missing verse?
Well, I have, and you'll see it up on the screen right now. What you're looking at is a page from the Fillmore Brothers first hymnal. I think it's called Songs of Glory. Yes. And the most popular hymn in the hymnal Songs of Glory is Bringing in the Sheaves. So you're looking at it right now, and if you notice, it has 4 verses. And the second verse, and this was published, they started the publishing house in the 1870s, and so this was published very soon after the hymn was written. So it may be that this is an original verse, and so it has the second verse. I think really goes to demonstrate the stridency of the approach that Knowles Shaw had towards his evangelism, and it reads, "Go and tell the nations, now in heathen blindness, tell them Jesus died, now no excuse he leaves. Bid them come to Jesus, thus prepare the harvest. You shall come rejoicing, bringing in the sheaves." And then it goes into the chorus, the refrain. And so, is that the verse?
That's the verse. But, I have a hunch it was Knowles Shaw.
I think so.
I mean, they only found it in this other guy's version, but that doesn't mean it didn't originate.
It kind of sounds like
yeah,
him, don't you?
it certainly fits his evangelistic style.
When they say this other guy's version, which other guy are you talking about?
It's a guy named Franklin Island.
So
Eiland.
So obviously, it's not just in Franklin Island's version; it's also in the Fillmore hymnal. So
There
it's
you
in
go.
2 places.
Yeah.
So we've just
right.
advanced
I think we
musical
have.
research.
Yeah.
Because now
At
we've
the
identified 2
time of the
hymnals.
writing of this, whoever this was that wrote that article, that's what they do. They were saying that it didn't appear anywhere else, and that's why they were a little confused over
And
where it originated.
I had an
Yeah.
article by this, or a blog actually, by this one person who said that he knew that there was supposedly a 4th verse, but he couldn't find it anywhere.
Yeah.
So,
Now
yeah,
we have
exactly.
it.
yeah.
You're
And
in the
that
know
same
more than
article,
most.
Somebody commented.
That's right.
And that's how I knew
Uh-huh.
about the other. But
Yeah.
why it's significant that we even talk about that missing verse. The other 3 verses are, well, how shall I put this?
How are you
They're-
going to put that,
I'm
Wendy?
not sure how I'm going to put this.
They're more,
Help
a
me
little
out,
bit more
Pastor.
encouraging, wouldn't you say?
There we
A little
go.
bit more encouraging, uplifting, inviting,
Yeah.
as opposed to trying to impose religion on others. And I think it shows. I think it's significant that within half a decade of the hymn first being written, that verse drops out to the point where it's almost impossible to find. And so we have then the version that we're more familiar with, and it's also interesting, I think, that of the 4 verses, it's the one that doesn't have "We shall come rejoicing, bringing in the sheaves." It's the one that says "You shall come rejoicing," and so by emphasizing the verses that have the "we" language, it draws people in.
Well,
And it invites them into the process, as opposed to, all right, I know everything that you're supposed to be. You need to know. Now I'm going to tell you so that you now know what you need to, because it kind of implies that this person here has a superior position over the other person, as opposed to we're all in this together kind of thing.
well, and I was just going to say that the other verses can be interpreted in many different ways, where that one is pretty much, it's very judgmental.
It certainly seems that way. It
And
makes-
so the others, if you look at it in a more philosophical way, it can be many different things than just bringing in the sheaves, so that eventually you will reap the joy of heaven.
And another part of that we need to keep in mind about in terms of the history of religion in America and the traditions that this is coming out of, when people would say, those in heathen blindness, they weren't just talking about nations elsewhere in the world that most of the people worship in a different religion than Christianity. They're talking denominations. There were Christians that would put Catholics in that heathen blindness as much as someone who practices Islam or someone who's Buddhist, for instance. And so it's, we have to be careful that we don't try to interpret it only through our own current lens of understanding of, who's under the big tent of the gospel kind of thing. But, it was a much smaller tent in those days for the most part. We've come a long way ecumenically. And I think being able to acknowledge the contributions that people who don't necessarily worship like we do or don't exactly have the same theology that we do, how they're still part of God's plan and God's mission and ministry to the world.
Yeah.
Well, coming back to the music itself, because we're going to transition to attempting to sing the two versions. In this time period, music often had a fashion current in the day of repeating the words of the theme, bringing in the sheaves, we shall come rejoicing, bringing in the sheaves. And so you say that over and over, and then you use the last line of each, whatever the stanza was, to form a refrain. And both Knowles Shaw's version and then George Minor's version employed that very, very obviously.
And again, it goes back to something that can be easily learned, easily sung,
Right.
And remembered.
Because they probably were not looking at a hymnal at the time.
Right,
so.
that's true. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But that was a form thing that kind of that's the glue that held the music together and the text together. And so listen for that when you hear these the
acorns
two
are falling.
Yes, it is acorn season. It's a little like the Captain Kangaroo ping pong, the Mr. Moose's ping pong balls out here.
Now I'm thinking of the apple trees in Wizard of Oz when they're throwing apples
right.
at us.
Yeah.
But we'll just kind of think about that when you're listening to it, and then also notice, we're talking about. The march movement in America was still a good ways away. We hadn't gotten to Henry Fillmore and John Philip Sousa yet, but this music has, for the musicians out there, has a lot of dotted 8th, 16th, rhythmic material in it. It's a very, when we play it, it does march. It's a little bit written in the style of Battle Hymn of the Republic.
True.
It
Which was
has
written
that
at the
same
same
da
time.
da 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 da, and this
Yeah.
da 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 da
Da,
da
da,
da.
da,
Yeah.
da.
So it has that dotted A 16th feel to it. It lends itself to sort of it's a march rhythm, really, in a way. And so it's sort of a precursor to some of the march movement that we had in America later on, and that was so popular. So that's something to listen to, as well as some of the melodic changes that Mr. Minor employed. His version is simpler. It's
Absolutely,
possible maybe when we go to do this, we'll start with that, because that is the one you're likely to have heard. If you've sung it in your own churches, or if you have seen it in a TV episode
Media.
or a movie or something like that, it would be the version that you would likely
And
have heard.
let's also just throw in that Minor might have changed that a little bit because it was easier to print. It's very
Could
possible
be. I mean,
that
there could be
instead of
lots
all of those,
reasons.
dotted notes and all the and the
Yeah.
16th notes and that
Minor
kind of
was
thing.
a Sunday school superintendent. He was a member of First Baptist in Richmond,
Uh-huh.
Virginia. And he was a musician there too. And he also, just like everybody else, was, wrote songbooks and things. And
Yeah.
so if you're trying to teach a song to a bunch of kids or something, you might want to simplify.
Keep the
So
end
we're
that's
just
easier to
guessing.
print.
We're so totally guessing, but
Yeah.
you
You
know,
don't use as much ink when
music,
there's not.
yeah, there's
the
many
notes aren't so
reasons
black.
that these changes come about. That's
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
And that I always find that interesting, no matter how I feel, really, even about the music of the day. Whether it's a favorite hymn of mine or not, is irrelevant. It just even taking something, it's history, and so you look at it through a historical lens, I think, and you see music history and American history and religious history sort of all,
Yeah.
sort of going at the same time.
Absolutely, they're all connected.
Yeah.
One of my favorite classes at Florida State was we sang a U.S. historical music. It was a choir
Oh, wow.
or a chorus
yeah.
that we
Yeah.
sang music through Florida American history. It was
Well, you
really
must have
cool.
sang a lot of Henry Fillmore in that class.
Well,
I think, but-
unfortunately, no.
Not singing though. There
let
you
me-
go. He's more instrumental.
Let me make one note as well. Point out that when you see the version of Bringing the Sheaves that's from the Fillmore hymnal, you're going to notice that in the notes there are little numbers. And apparently A.D. Fillmore had an older brother named Comfort Lavius Fillmore. Fantastic
Hey.
names. And he had developed this kind of phonetic system of notation of music that involved numbers, so numbers 1 through 8. And I think that that's the reason that these Fillmore publishers put those numbers in the notes, that they were kind of trying to keep their uncle's numeric system alive. It did not last.
No.
So no one uses
Well, the
that
numbers
anymore.
were scale tone
they're-
numbers.
Yes.
So
They
if
go
you're
to
the
do,
key
re, mi.
is C, everybody played a C scale if you had a piano lesson. So C would be 1.
1.
D
Right.
would be
Yeah.
2, and
Yeah.
now your version's actually in the key of B flat,
Right.
which was the original key of Bringing in the Sheaves, we think, and so B flat is 1, and
Mm-hmm. Yep.
C is 2, and 3 is D, and
Well,
so
just
on.
the, it's just the steps of the scale.
yeah,
so,
that's right. Yeah,
But as a singer, it's okay to think about it as a musician, as an instrumentalist, because you always get the same pitch when you put your third finger down or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
But as a singer, numbers, I'm sorry, don't mean a thing, but going from do to mi does.
Right.
Mi means something, 3 does not really mean a
Right.
whole lot.
Well, there's a reason it didn't last.
No.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
so it's a little like solfege.
Yes,
you
it
know,
is
and
solfege,
if you
but-
know the Do Re Mi song from The Sound of Music,
Right.
that's the
But as a
tones of
singer,
the scale.
those tones you can learn and understand and hear them in your head. 1 to 3, not so much. It just doesn't do the same thing.
And then the other thing about A.D. Fillmore is when he first started writing music, he was using the shape note system.
Which
And then he
was why he probably did that.
he changed to our standard system that we use now. And so, again, he kind of embodies like that progress of music in America, and you see these trends happening around that time, and people like Shaw and people like A.D. Fillmore, and then you see how they're and now shape notes are for people that are into the history of music. I mean, if we pull out an ancient manuscript or something and it has shape notes,
It's not
then you
easy.
learn how to,
Well,
then
we
you
talked
learn
a
how to
little
do
bit
it.
last
Yeah.
week.
Yeah,
we
exactly.
talked about that a little bit.
Yeah.
So
Those
yeah,
very different. You have to learn
So,
how to
I'm
do
glad that we're just using
Yeah.
the system that we
I
have
spent
now.
a lot of time last week, and only because I found it irresistible to figure out the puzzle of that. Now
Yeah.
think we all are
Mhm.
God, that old manuscript.
Mhm.
I'm such a nerd. I actually enjoy doing that. So, whatever. And I'm not an expert at it, but that's why it was hard for me. Is because I don't really know a lot about that system. So I haven't used it a lot. But we need to move inside.
Yeah, let's have some
and
fun with
do
this.
these
Yeah.
tunes for you. So, we'll transition and be back with you.
Sowing in the morning, sowing seeds of kindness, sowing in
And now we're going to sing the version that was published in the Fillmore Brothers' first hymnal. This dates back to before Minor wrote his version of the tune. And who knows, this could be the first time in over 100 years this version has been sung, and is probably the first time it's been put on YouTube. So enjoy the history. Sowing in the morning, sowing seeds of kindness, sowing in the noontide and the dewy eves, waiting for the harvest and the time of reaping, we shall come rejoicing, bringing in the sheaves, bringing in the golden sheaves, bringing in the golden sheaves, waiting for the harvest and the time of reaping, we shall come rejoicing, bringing in the sheaves.
Well, everyone, I hope you enjoyed walking through the history of bringing in the sheaves. Next week, we'll have another in our series of Thanksgiving hymns. And for now, we'll see you later on the Music Chat.